I know. You'd rather hear her play than me preach. I get that all the time. Nothing I haven't heard before. Are there any bread makers here? Okay, there's a few. Have you ever made bread and forgot the salt? It only takes a teaspoon or two to make bread, and you don't taste the salt in the bread. But if you ever make bread without the salt, you will not eat the bread. You will throw it out. And there's a city in the Old Testament that was like a loaf of bread with no salt. All it was worth was just to be thrown out. That city is named Sodom. It was located in the south part of the Dead Sea. Very wealthy city because of the salt and mineral trade. But it went the way of wealthy city without any boundaries. Got involved in immorality of every sort. But another part about Sodom that most people don't realize is not only was there rampant immorality going on, but also they didn't like poor people. They had laws to keep poor people out of their city. If a poor person showed up, it was open season on them. You could kill them. You could rape them. You could enslave them. You could take their stuff. You could do whatever you wanted to do. A good example of that is a verse we read in Ezekiel. It says, "Now this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, plenty of food, and comfortable security, but didn't support the poor and needy." In other words, charity was against the law in Sodom. They had one law that said this: anyone who strengthens the hands of a poor person by giving them a loaf of bread will be burned with fire. One time, this guy came into Sodom, a poor man. He came into the city, and people thought either he'll leave or he'll die because nobody's going to do anything for him. But he kept on surviving, and they couldn't figure out how was he surviving. And then they discovered that this one woman felt sorry for him, and so she would come to the well every day with her bucket, pretending to be there to get water, but she had a little bit of flour in her bucket, and she'd take that little flour and she would dump it into his bucket as she's pretending to she was there to get water. He would take that flour and make bread with it. And when they found out what she was doing, they attached her to the city wall, covered her with honey, and let the bees come and kill her. So, consequently, the poor and the needy stayed away from Sodom. The reason Sodom is in the Bible is because Abraham's nephew Lot lived there. He was wealthy, so he was accepted in Sodom. And we're going to pick up the story in Genesis 18, and what has happened is three guys have come to Abraham, and they told Abraham, by this time next year, you're going to have a child. And so they're getting up to leave. And as they're getting up to leave, here's where we pick up with the story. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is extremely serious. I will go down to see if what they have done justifies the cry that has come up to me. If not, I will find out. Now that makes a lot of sense if you know what was going on in this part of the world. So what's going to follow is discussion that Abraham has with one of these guys, I guess God in the flesh in a sense. And what we find out something very important about the God we worship. We find out how he views us in this. What's God's view of us as his followers? Let's keep on going. The men turned from there and went towards Sodom while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham stepped forward and said, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? In other words, Abraham knows how wicked the city is. That's going to likely be destroyed. And Abraham goes, but wait a minute, God. You're going to destroy not only the wicked, but you're going to destroy the righteous with the wicked? And this is what comes next. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away instead of sparing the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it, who are in it? You could not possibly do such a thing to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. You could not possibly do that. Won't the judge of the whole world do what is just? To give you some perspective here, they've excavated the city of Sodom, and they have estimated that somewhere between 800 and 1,200 people lived in it. So let's just go with 1,000. So when he's saying, what if there are just 50 righteous? He's saying, what if just 5%? If 5% of the people in Sodom are righteous, are you going to destroy the city and destroy those 5% along with it? Next, then the Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So what are we finding out here? We're finding out that a little bit of righteousness can go a long way. A few righteous people could spare the whole city. Then Abraham answered, since I have ventured to speak, my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes, suppose the 50 righteous lack 5. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? He replied, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. So, hey, God, what if there's not 50? Are you going to let 5 people then decide the fate of the city? Then they keep going. Then he spoke to him again. Suppose 40 are found there. He answered, I will not do it on account of 40. Then he said, let my Lord not be angry, and I will speak further. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Then he said, since I have ventured to speak to my Lord, suppose 20 are found there. He replied, I will not destroy it on account of 20. Then he said, let my Lord not be angry, and I will speak one more time. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, I will not destroy it on account of 10. And when the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place. So, what are we discovering here? We're discovering you can bargain with God and not be struck dead. That's one thing. But what we're also discovering is that just 10 people out of 1,000, if just 1% of the people are righteous, God will take those odds. That's enough righteousness from his perspective to have an effect on the city. That's enough to keep them from being destroyed. So what happens next is 2 of these guys, they go into Sodom and they destroy the city. What's believed in that day is that since that whole area lies on top of a fault line, that there was an earthquake. And when the earthquake happened, pockets of natural gas shot up in the air, and it was lit on fire by the fires in the city of Sodom. From their perspective, it looked like fire was coming down from heaven. They've excavated all 5 cities in that area and found them all coated with a coat of sulfur. Now, in biblical perspective, from a biblical point of view, God had enough. So, here's the thing. We thank God. How could you allow all this immorality going on? Why don't you do something? Why don't you do something about this? God's standards have not changed. God has not lost view of how things are happening and what's happening inside the world. But from his perspective, if from his perspective just 1% of the people are righteous, there's still hope. A little bit of righteousness, like a little bit of salt, can go a long way. And so as long as there's some righteousness there, they can have an effect. There's still hope. Then about 2,000 years later, Jesus is on a hillside. There's a few people gathered around him who are just trying to get by. They're just living day to day, just trying to survive in their world. And Jesus says this to them, you are the salt of the earth. You are the preservative for the entire planet. To which they would say, we're not the salt of anything. We don't have any influence at all over what's going on in this world. We don't have any political influence. We don't have any financial influence. We're just a bunch of nobodies. But Jesus says, no, you are the salt. You have, your righteousness is preserved. You're like a preservative for the whole planet, because in that day, salt was not a flavor enhancer. It was primarily a preservative. And what he's saying to them is that you guys, you're a reminder to the world that there is a right and a wrong. You're a reminder to the world that there is a God. He would say to the students, you're the salt at your school. And you think, I'm not popular. I'm not the captain of anything. But you make a difference. Because salt makes a difference. It's like before tests, and all the kids are texting each other the answers to the test, and they keep texting you the answer to the test. You say, no, that's wrong. Don't do that. They just laugh and keep doing it anyway. But you're a reminder to them there's a right and a wrong. Reminder of them that there's a proper way to do things, that there is some righteousness still in this world. You're the salt of Home Depot or the construction company you work at or the oil company you work at. Whenever you live based on the convictions that you get from God's word, you make a difference because salt always makes a difference. And then we read this. You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Here's the thing. What people would do in that day is they would go out to the marshes of the Mediterranean Sea, and they would gather little sticks and bark and reeds and things like that, and they would go back and they'd rub it on their fish or their meat, and so the salt would be transferred from that stick or that bark or whatever to the meat. And then once all the salt was gone from that reed or stick or whatever it was they had, what good is it? They just throw it out. Also, if they happen to be fortunate enough to have a little bag of salt, in that day, salt was not pure. Our salt doesn't break down, but in that day it wasn't pure salt. It could just break down. And once that salt had broken down, it chemically broken down, what good is just some white little sand in your hand? No good at all. Just throw it out. The point is this. When you lose your value to God and your value to the world, what good are you? You have no value to God whatsoever. When you stop making a difference, when there's no substantially difference between you and the world, you stop making a difference in the world, what value are you to God? Remember the Israelites, as they go to the promised land the first time, and because of their unbelief, they didn't go in. What were they good for? My people who have no faith, they have no trust in me, they're no value to me at all. They're just good for wandering around for the next 40 years and dying. The tragedy of the flood was not that a whole generation of people ceased to live, it's that a whole generation ceased to be fit to live. So here's the question that we have to ask. If the world stops being fit to live in, whose fault is that? If we stop being salty, it's not the world's fault, is it? See, what we want to do, our approach to our culture right now, is we look at all the immorality, we look at all the violence, we look at all the lying, the lack of integrity, all the junk going on, and we wish somebody would come and just shake the world and say, why won't you come to your senses? But God looks at all the immorality and the violence and the lying and the hatred going on and the prejudice and all that, and He wants to shake the church. Why won't you come to your senses? Because from His point of view, that's on us. Because our purpose is to be salt. Our purpose is to be light. Our purpose is to make a difference in the world. What we're doing is we're not showing the world what a marriage should be. We're not showing the world how to walk in purity. We're not showing the world how to have integrity. We're not showing the world how to have love with other people. We're not showing them that at all. And so from God's point of view, the reason that our culture is decaying is on us. We have ceased to live out our purpose, to be salt, to be light, to make a difference. Because if there's just a little bit, God's still holding out hope. Because a little bit of righteousness, like a little bit of salt, it will make a difference. It always makes a difference. So here's what I want you to take from this. Well, a few things. This is number one. Usually when a person graduates from high school or college, they're going out into the world, they're excited. Everything's new. New job. New car. Well, maybe not a new car, but an old new car. Marriage. They get excited because everything's new, everything's different. Then they get a job. And it's not long before that job becomes job. Then they get married. And that turns into marriage. Then they have a kid. And that turns into kids. And every day begins to look like the day before and the one that's going to come. job, marriage, kids, vacation, woo, then back to job, marriage, and kids. And then they begin to ask themselves, man, it used to be so exciting. Just life, it used to be different about life. Maybe I need to change jobs. Maybe I need to move to a different place. Maybe I need to get a different spouse. And years later, they discover they've got the scars, they've got the alimony, they got all that stuff going on, and nothing's changed. Why? Because they had no sense of purpose. See, purpose centers us. Purpose keeps us from going to extremes. Purpose keeps us from just giving in to our appetites. God created us for a purpose, to be salt, to be light, to make a difference. The second thing that I want you to understand is that discipleship is crucial. Let me explain this. Back in 2011, it's the NBA Finals. The Heat have won Game 1. There's 5 minutes left in Game 2, and the Heat's 16 points ahead. Everybody felt sorry for those overmatched Dallas Mavericks. Poor Mavericks. They don't stand a chance. But then something happened. The Heat quit playing to win. They just started playing not to lose. The Mavericks came back and won Game 2. They went on to win the series in 6 games. And I was so glad that the Heat, got what they deserved. Anyway, I'll stop there. I don't need to go any further on that point. But here's the thing. When a team goes into a prevent type defense, when they stop playing to win, they just start playing not to lose. Not only is that boring, they oftentimes lose the game. And it's so hard for a team to go from that defensive position back to an offensive mindset. To go from just trying not to lose to going back to pressing on and trying to win. And in the Christian life, there's defensive discipleship and there's offensive discipleship. The defensive discipleship is let's just protect ourselves from the world. Let's just not let the world come in and invade our little huddle here and our little bubble, our little Christian bubble. And there's good to that. But our hearts don't need protection as much as they need continual transformation. Our hearts don't need protection as much as they need to be able to overcome the world and overcome what's happening in the world and in our lives. The difficult thing about it is how do we go from defensive discipleship to offensive discipleship? 2 things are important. Number 1, you have to know your identity. We spent several months talking about that. And number 2, we have to be overwhelmed with the joy and the presence of our Lord and our God. Let me explain it this way. Last week, or I guess it was the week before maybe, or the end of the week before, but my son calls me up, my younger son, and he's telling me about all the little things he had in his little hotel stay. He's staying at the Ritz-Carlton in D.C., just a couple blocks off the mall. He said, he went back in his room at night, and they have a turn-down service there apparently. So, his bed's all prepared, and everything's sort of made up and ready for him. And he's not rich at all, but the people he works with are, and so he gets all these little perks all the time. And me and my other son, we kid him unmercifully about this. What? You had to fly coach? Oh, it must have been terrible for you. Not to get to upgrade to first class and all that, because he just has all that with his business. So here's the thing. Here's the point I want to make with all that. You spend a couple nights staying at the Ritz, Days Inn doesn't seem all that appealing to you. You spend a couple weeks in Hawaii, Splash Pad in Longview doesn't seem all that appealing to you, right? Here's the thing. You spend some time in the presence of God, all that stuff the world has to offer, all its idols, all that entertainment, all that just sort of loses its appeal. it just sort of goes away. It doesn't attract you anymore. 2 verses. Psalm 16:11, you reveal the path of life to me. In your presence is abundant joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures. And then 27:4, I have asked one thing from the Lord. It is what I desire, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, gazing on the beauty of the Lord and seeking him in his temple. So, any of you guys have stress in your life? Get real busy and stressed? David had that. And I know you may feel stressed out and feel real busy. But David was running a kingdom. And all you have is your poor little pitiful you kingdom in here. David had issues. He had foreign affair issues. He had a thing called the Philistines. He would beat them. They would come back for more. He would beat them. They'd come back for more. Always back and forth, back and forth. Whoop, and they'd come back and they'd keep coming back for more. Them along with some of the other tribes around there. David had family issues that would make the Jerry Springer show seem tame. Not only was there adultery in his life, his son raped his daughter. One of his sons killed his other son. One of his sons kicked him off the throne. You say, I'm having trouble getting along with my kids. Well, if they haven't kicked you out of your own house yet, you're probably doing okay. But here's the point I want to make. So much in the Psalms, David's focus is not this issue, Lord. I've got this family issue. I've got these Philistine issues. I've got this trying to run the kingdom issues. His focus is wanting to be in the presence of God. When he says, I want to dwell in the house of the Lord, he's not talking about, oh, I just want to have a 24-hour church service. Let's just pretend all this stuff isn't going on in my life. No, what he's saying is that if I can just be in the presence of God, if I can just spend that time with him in his presence, all this stuff, it doesn't matter if it's going good, if it's going bad. I'm okay. I'm better than okay if I can just be with him in his presence. That's why he says, if I can just behold the beauty of the Lord. And he says, so this one thing I want, not solve this issue, not do this for me, just come and be in your presence. Everything would be okay at that point. See, God is present in 2 ways. One we call his omnipresence. That's when God dwells everywhere in his fullness at the same time. In other words, there's not a part of God here right now and a part of God in the far reaches of the universe. He dwells everywhere in his fullness. That's his omnipresence. But then there's his manifest presence. That's when God reveals his glory to us, himself, his nature to us in our hearts. That may result in us falling down to our knees, falling flat on our face, may result in tears, it may result in joy, it may result in praise, it may result in fear. But it's when we have that time just to be in his presence. And when David is talking about, I just want to be in the presence of God, just to behold his beauty, he's not talking about his omnipresence, he's talking about his manifest presence. Let me give you an example of that. After the golden calf issue, Moses is having this conversation with God. This is Exodus 33. The Lord spoke to Moses, go up from here, you and the people you brought up from the land of Egypt to the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I will send an angel ahead of you and will drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up with you, because you are a stiff-necked people. Otherwise, I might destroy you on the way. Now, when God's saying, I won't go with you, he's not saying you're going to get to Canaan and my omnipresence is not going to be there. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, my manifest presence will not go with you. You can still go, and you can conquer Canaan, and you'll be all provided for. All your needs will be provided for. I just want, in my manifest presence, I just won't be with you. See, God's not going to force himself in our lives when we desire a substitute. These words he speaks to Moses ought to be sobering words to us. That we can do the Christian life. We can still accomplish things. We can still be organized, and we can still do some things, but we can be content to do those without his presence. So God tells him, go. You'll conquer the land. You'll be able to drive out all those people. I'll still provide for you. But you just won't have my presence with you. You can be content to do your Christian life without the presence of God. And he replied, this is a few verses later, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. If your presence does not go, Moses responded to him, don't make us go up from here. So, when Moses went up to the mountain to pray again, it wasn't to beg God to let Israel live. It was to beg God to come and live with Israel. What Moses says is, God, it's not enough for you to go before us. It's not enough for you to be above us. It's not enough for you to provide for us. We have to have your presence with us. You have to be with us. And here's the next verse. How will it be known that I and your people have found favor with you unless you go with us? I and your people will be distinguished by this from all the other people on the face of the earth. What's he saying? He says the thing that distinguishes us from everybody else is not our vocabulary. It's not how we do church. It's not how we organize the church. It's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14, that when unbelievers come in, they need to know the presence of God is in this place. That's how we're distinguished. It's not what we do or how we organize or what we teach on. Is the presence of God there. We have forgotten that you can have God's provision, you can have his protection, but you can go on without his presence. It's what the letters in Revelation, what Jesus says in Revelation 3, behold, I stand at the door and knock. In other words, that church in Laodicea, it's like he's on the outside. They're doing church, and they're doing it pretty good. They're looking good. They think we got everything we need, but the presence of God's not there. And they were content. They were satisfied. They looked at their own lives and thought, I'm doing okay. See, that's why David says, in your presence is fullness of joy. Or as a deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. That's why delight yourself in the Lord is not a suggestion, it's a command. That we are to want to strive for his presence in our lives. And the sad thing is, some of us have been doing Christian life for that for so long, we're not even sure what that looks like. Walt Disney World in Florida. They used to do exit surveys. And they found out in their exit surveys that people were leaving disappointed. And the executives thought, how could people leave Disney World disappointed? We're the greatest amusement park in the world. But then they began to drill down more in their surveys, and they discovered that why people were disappointed was not because of long lines. It wasn't because of high prices. It wasn't because standing in the heat. It's because there was somebody they came to see, and they didn't see him. The person that they came to see and didn't see was none other than Mickey Mouse. Then they discovered, well, how do we fix that? And they thought, we can't put 5 or 6 Mickeys all around the park because some kid's going to wave goodbye to Mickey, get on tram, go to the other side of the park, and go, oh, there's Mickey again. Woo! That's like having 2 Santa Claus at the same mall on either end of the mall. You know, that can just mess with the kid's mind. So instead, what they decided is that, okay, every day we're going to have a parade right down the middle of Main Street. And the grand marshal of that parade is going to be Mickey Mouse. Nobody left disappointed after that. Look, people don't come here to see Randy and Tim and Gary and Sam. They come here, they want to sense and be in the midst of the presence of God. And may they never leave disappointed. But this can't happen corporately till it happens individually. We have ceased to be salt and light because we no longer know what it means to just to spend time in his presence. We don't have that. That's not our overwhelming desire. We're not like David. This one thing I want. This is what I go for every day of my life, just to be with you. Because if I'm there, it doesn't matter what's going on in my world. I'm okay. It could be going great. It could be falling apart. But if I get to spend time in your presence, everything's okay at that point. That's why we need revival. So we can learn what it means again to be in his presence and to make a difference in this world. But before God's going to send his presence, we have to mourn his absence. We have to be willing to admit that we have been doing the Christian life content to have it without his presence. We have to admit that we have been a people that have been looking at the world around us, the culture around us, and all its decay, and blaming the world. When God says, no, you won't see how I see things. If there's just 1% of you that are righteous, I have hope. That's enough. In other words, the reason the world is decaying is because we have ceased to be salt and we have ceased to be light. And for far too long, we put the blame on those people. Whatever those people are to you. I don't know. They may be the Republicans. They may be the Democrats. They may be this homosexual group or what. We just put the blame on those people. And God says, no, that's not where the blame goes. You just quit making a difference in the world. You fell into this defensive discipleship mode. And you don't know what it's like to be a part of transforming the world and making a difference in the world anymore. So it starts with becoming salt, becoming light, by seeking his presence. Well, let me back up. It starts with mourning his absence, okay? It starts by willing to admit that that's where we're at. Well, let me rephrase that again. It starts by admitting that's where I'm at. God, I've been neglecting your presence. I've been content to do the Christian life without you. It's like you're standing outside the door knocking, wanting to get in. See, whether you want to admit it or not, you can't do church without God. And far too long, that's what we've been doing. So that's why we're going to be talking about revival. But if you're not willing to back up to the point and admit that what needs to be there is missing, when you're willing to go through your day and you have no desire to be in the presence of God, then of course the world has an appeal to you. Of course you're excited about the video games. You're excited about this trip and everything else that the world has to offer. And these idols begin to take first place in your life. There's nothing wrong with, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those things. I'm just saying that we have let, the presence of God has been so absent in our lives that we have let those things become our overwhelming desire. And we're not willing to say, the one thing I want, and there's not anything in second place. Don't try and rank this stuff. Jesus did away with that. We want to go, okay, God first, family second, work third, or church, whatever order. No, if there's a God first, nothing's in second place. Because as soon as something's in second place, that's what's competing for first place. No, it's God first. Nothing comes even close to second. That's why Jesus, through his way of hyperbole, would say, unless you hate your father, mother, brother, and sister, you cannot be my disciple. He's not talking about literally hate those people we're commanded to love. No, he's just saying that when you put him in first place, nothing comes even close to second. And we're not even on the path to being there, in a sense. That's where we have to get on the path at. And so the first thing we have to do is mourn his absence, mourn that thing in our hearts has caused us not to put God in first place and to seek Him with all we have. More than the fact that we get up in the morning and we got everything else on our mind besides, I just want to spend time in God's presence. That's where it has to start. And again, we can't be that corporately if we're not that individually. So maybe God is laying that on your heart this morning. You may just want to come and kneel down and just mourn the fact, oh God, I've done this for so long. I've been content to do my whole life without your presence. See, Moses said, we don't want to leave here if you're not going to go with us. Don't want to move from this spot if your manifest presence is not going to be on our lives. But we say, sure, God, you let us go and take care of church business. I'm content whether your presence is there or not. But Moses, who had spent time in the presence of God, knew better than that. And so I'm just asking you to come to that point today. Mourn his absence. Seek his presence. Make a difference. Make a difference in the world around you. Where you see bondages broken and lives changed and marriages restored. Make a difference around you. Okay. We'll stop there. We're going to have a hymn of invitation. And this is time for you to come up. Maybe it's for the first time you want to commit yourself to being a Christ follower. You can do that. Or maybe you've been pricked enough to where you're willing to come and just say, God, I don't care what's going on around me. This one thing I have to do is come, first of all, and mourn that I have not been seeking your presence, that you've been absent in my life. And go through that time. Again, it's not a place God wants you to live, but it's a doorway you have to go through to get where he wants you to go. And be willing to take that path. All right? Let's stand together.